about time? You need to go that. That one. I was trying to remember what he used to say when the narrator used to open it, and I can't remember. I was trying to remember the Batman narrator from the TV show, and I couldn't remember what he used to say. Something very particular, a way of opening it up.
Yeah.
Okay. Meanwhile, in Gotham City, oh no, we just jest because we have all things DC to talk about. I'm Lee Ford, and welcome, as ever,
I'm
to
Andy
the
Beacon.
FilmFile. Good to have you with us for the next, I'm going to say hour, but knowing us, it could probably be 2, 3, even being broken off into a backdoor pilot for another show. Who knows? But welcome. So, as you know, in each episode, we do a deep dive into a classic cult film or a film that we just downright want to talk about. So much has been said about our deep dive today that I don't know if we can offer anything new to the discussion, but we can certainly bring our enthusiasm to it. It came out in 1981. It was directed by Steven Spielberg, written by Lawrence Kasdan, based on the story by George Lucas and Philip Kaufman. It starred Harrison Ford, Karen Allen, Paul Freeman, Ronald Lacey, John Rhys Davis, and Denham Elliott. And it changed people's lives. And all you have to do is hear this little bit of music to know what film we are talking about.
Insert music.
So all you need is that riff, isn't it?
Dun 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 dun, and that's in my head now. Dun 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 dun.
Conceived back in the 1970s, George Lucas was seeking to modernize the serial films of the early 20th centuries. You know the ones, the Republic features, your Flash Gordons, your Buck Rogers, and developed his idea with filmmaker Philip Kaufman, who suggested the Ark as the title, who suggested the Ark of the Covenant as the film's goal. Lucas eventually focused on developing this 1977 little-known space opera known as Star Wars, but always wanted to keep the faith with Raiders of the Lost Ark. Oh, I can't speak, but always wanted to keep in what do I want to say, Andy? Always wanted to keep the idea of Raiders of the Lost Ark going, and he resumed that with Steven Spielberg. They chatted about the project for several months. The pair had ideas and set pieces and stunts for the film, and they hired Lawrence Kasdan to fill in the narrative gaps and create what we now know as a classic film. Yes, there have been sequels. Yes, there's even been a prequel. But there is something about Raiders of the Lost Ark which, in all honesty, is still the best one for many, many reasons. Now, to give it a bit of context, I saw this at the ABC Cinema in Sheffield. And for some reason, I was late to the party because my parents had seen it before me and kept telling me how much I should go and see this film. I don't know why I was late to the party. I can't answer that now in hindsight, but I was. And then I went to see it. And you know what? Then I went to see it again and again and again. Came out on VHS, owned it on that, owned it on DVD, have it on Blu-ray. And it's still a go-to because it's so damn exciting and so damn charming. Andy, Raiders of the Lost Ark.
I was a wee little lad of 8 years old when this came out. It's 4 decades old. 4 decades. I remember this film being everywhere. On TV, we had behind-the-scenes specials. There were posters up advertising it on hoardings. Everywhere you looked, people were talking about it. The must-see film. And especially for a lad of my age, who I used to relish watching reruns of the action-adventure serials each morning during the summer holidays. I used to love those kind of things. So this was that brought to vivid life. Of course, it was one of those films I got to see on the big screen on initial release, and I've lapped up every opportunity to rewatch it in latter years through the VHS release, the TV showings over Christmas or bank holidays, DVD, Blu-ray like yourself. It's a regular revisit, and it's something that still lives up to scrutiny today. And in recent years, a remastered cinema release gave me an opportunity to revisit it on the big screen all over again and still fall in love with it from the start. Ford is absolutely perfect in the role of the archaeologist with a fondness for a bullwhip and a fedora. His grizzled approach works so well for this adventurer. The storyline of seeking the Ark of the Covenant also leads to him opening old wounds at the same time. One of those wounds being the marvellous Karen Allen as Marion Ravenwood, who, rather than just being a damsel in distress in this film, it's her tough, feisty, and spirited nature that make her stand out as something much more than what latter films would have as the female lead. The pair of them bicker and bounce off each other with a chemistry that lends well to the film. And you've already mentioned the support cast in the rundown of who's in this, but how good is Paul Freeman as Rene Belloc? So the rival archaeologist aiding the Nazis is charmingly evil. You actually like him, even though you absolutely hate him at the same time. And then you've got Ronald Lacey as Major Tote, who is just twisted and menacing throughout. The poor guy would probably get punched by people in the street for being such a nasty piece of work in this film because he's so good in it. And then you've got like the magnificent roles of like played by Denham Elliott and John Rhys Davis, giving some light comic relief that never overpowers the serious adventure drama of the whole film. This is a film that I absolutely adore. The action, the action, the adventure, and the spectacle make it work. And Spielberg and his cinematographer Douglas Clockham absolutely deliver on making sure that every scene looks amazing and plays well. I'll let you pick up from that point.
And it was Lucas's love of those early serials, as I said before, the Buck Rogers, the Flash Gordons. And in fact, if you remember correctly, that initially Lucas wanted to get the rights to Flash Gordon, and ended up not being able to do that and made Star Wars instead. And if you ever read any of the early Star Wars scripts, they were much more Flash Gordon than they were the Star Wars that we know today. But while he was finishing American Graffiti back in '73, he had an old movie poster of a heroic character leaping from a horse to a truck. And it reminded Lucas of that love of those old, early serial films, in particular things like Fighting Legion and Spy Smasher and Dan Winslow of the Navy. And there was a particular Charlton Heston, which was he played a leather jacketed adventurer. And all those stuck, and he created the iconic character of Indiana Smith. Wait a minute, you say? Indiana Smith? Well, yeah, that was the original title. The name Indiana comes from the name of Lucas's dog, but originally the character was Indiana Smith. So he worked out the idea with Philip Kaufman with the intent that Kaufman would direct. Kaufman brought in the idea of the Ark of the Covenant, and that led into the idea of the Nazis because of Hitler's fascination historically with the occult. Lucas wanted Kaufman to direct the film, but because he was already committed to working on the Western, the outlaw Josie Wales, because he was already committed to working on the Western, the outlaw Josie Wales with Clint Eastwood, Lucas paused this idea and again returned to working on Star Wars. And of course, we all know what happened then. Spielberg and Lucas used to have a little bit of a tradition where they would vacation together, whether they go on vacation to Hawaii to avoid any potential negative reviews about the theatrical debut of their films. And with Spielberg, they talked about this idea of wanting to create their own action hero. And Spielberg wanted to direct a James Bond film, but Lucas pitched him The Adventures of Indiana Smith, still hoping that Kaufman would direct. It was quite clear that Spielberg was the man to replace him. And as I said before, they brought in Lawrence Kasdan, a great writer who'd been working in Hollywood, who again created a lavish screenplay, and he brought in those elements of the Magnificent Seven, the idea of the anti-hero, an
Yeah.
archaeologist, because originally, funny enough, Indiana Smith was a nightclub owner, and we saw hints of that in the sequel. And they basically pieced together enough of a film that several elements were cut and dropped into Temple of Doom. And that created the sorry, I lost track. I was reading ahead. And that created sorry, there's a bit of noise in the background. But all those elements created the Indiana Jones and the Lost Ark that we know today. And it is an absolutely classic movie. Now, because of it being set in a different time, that's one of the reasons that makes it feel absolutely timeless, because it ties into our shared knowledge of the cliffhanger story. It gives it this sense of always feeling fresh, because we know the beats intrinsically. It is the perfect hero, and with Harrison Ford in the lead, it just gave it that charisma. But Andy, you're about to tell me that it wasn't necessarily always going to be Harrison Ford.
Yes.
Yes, you are going to tell me that.
Was it
Tom
Tom
Selleck. Oh,
Selleck who
sorry, I
was?
thought that being, you know, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely slipped my mind. Yes, initially Harrison Ford wasn't up for it. Now, he seems like a daft thing when you say it now. How come Harrison Ford wasn't going to be involved? You know, surely he was huge, what with, you know, that Star Wars thing, and he knew Lucas, so wasn't he the ideal fit? No, it was originally going to be Tom Selleck. Yes, Magnum PI himself, who was a huge name at the time, was the lead that they wanted for this role. And I can kind of see it. When I think about it, I can kind of see it. Even though Harrison Ford definitely made the role his own, I can see why they wanted to go for a Selleck kind of approach. He's got the kind of nature that would have fitted into it, maybe played it slightly differently. And obviously, we wouldn't have had at least one of the most iconic moments of the film. Um, Let's talk about some of the moments, because from the opening scene, Indy raiding the Peruvian temple, resulting in the iconic and oft emulated fleeing from a rolling boulder, to the bloody finale of chilling effects, it's packed with action set pieces and moments that land well. And the circumstances on set change some scenes, most notably that moment with a swordsman flourishing his blade in a show-offy way as he's ready to attack Indy in the middle of the markets, and Indy just casually takes his gun out and shoots him and moves on. It's a moment that was supposed to be an epic fight, but because Ford himself wasn't feeling well at the time, he insisted that I've got a gun, why don't I just shoot him? And so they shot it and went, actually, that's actually worked so much better. And that was what Ford brought to it. He brought that, well, you know, this is, I mean, Ford was known for doing this on Star Wars, that he said that things were nonsense and hokey and didn't make sense, and he would call things out. I think with Indiana Jones, his attitude of doing that worked to the benefit of the film, because he didn't just sit there and accept nonsense in the script. He would question it, and they would change the script around it to make it work and feel like it's a natural thing.
It's kind of interesting because, as you said, you can't really think of Indiana Jones as other than Harrison Ford, because he poured, or you feel he poured so much of himself into it. And the reason he wasn't initially cast was his connection to Star Wars. It was seen as too close. Some of the other names that were considered, people like Nick Nolte, Tim Matheson, Peter Coyote, Jeff Bridges, Sam Elliott, Harry Hamlin, were all considered. And it was because of Tom Selleck's relationship to Magnum PI, and the actor strike of 1980 put that show on hiatus, which wouldn't have allowed Selleck to star as Jones. And even though, to be honest, Selleck did have a go at almost making a couple of Raiders of the Lost Ark style movies, it never really worked out for him as a big screen hero. He always worked better on the tube as opposed to movies. But there were so many iconic moments. I mean, the set pieces are fantastic all the way through. All the stunts are absolutely have a real sense of weight to them that perhaps some of the
Yeah.
one in particular sequel didn't. You felt that Indy was taking the knocks. Indy would be hurt. Indy gets up at the end, but he's damaged. there's a real sense of threat that runs through the entire movie, and that's one of the elements that's missing for me from Temple of Doom, because it's a prequel, and you know that Indy will survive. You never felt that Indiana Jones in Raiders of the Lost Ark would make it intact to the end of the movie, and that was one of the key elements of it. The fact that it goes from fighting Nazis to the supernatural made
Yeah,
it for me. Give me those two elements in any sort of movie. Make it mysterious, make it supernatural. Then I am in. That is my kind of a movie, and not just a. And it could have gone either way. It could have been a purely supernatural movie, or it could have been a pure action film. But combining those two elements absolutely makes it work for me. It lands every time. We talked about 1941 and the effect that 1941 had on Spielberg as a filmmaker. This film was lean. He brought it on time, brought it in on budget, made him a better filmmaker. And because of the 1941 curse, Spielberg works very, very hard all the way through
yeah.
to bring this in on as tight a budget as absolutely possible. And it's kind of, the fact that it lacked some of the money and some of the budget that they wanted made them more creative. I think if it had been overscheduled and over budget, like 1941, for instance, I don't think we'd have had Spielberg being as creative as he was in this particular film. Absolutely adore it. I mean, we can't talk about Raiders of the Lost Ark without talking about subsequent sequels and where they went.
Yeah.
So, in running order, Temple of Doom is okay. Don't dislike it. Likes more supernatural
Hmm.
quality than I would have liked, and makes it much more sort of a routine action film. Love Last Crusade, and the less said, the better about Kingdom of the Air. I can't remember what the full title was, and I don't really care.
Yeah, Temple of Doom felt like it was a rushed out sequel just to try to cash in on the success of Raiders. Uh, I I don't like the character of Willie Scott, played by Kate Capshaw. I don't like the character of Willie Scott, played by Kate Capshaw. After we just had Karen Allen as the fierce, feisty, and also very self-determined Marion, to go and have Kate Capshaw as basically a screaming, girly damsel in distress throughout is an annoyance. And whilst it's got some great moments, the opening club scuffle is packed with fun peril. The minecart escape is thrilling, and the rope bridge is absolutely jaw-droppingly tense. But they dropped in a film that felt tired, and it felt like it was just a collection of action set pieces with a loose story around it, whereas the first one felt like a journey. Then you got to the third film, and boy, am I so glad that they picked things up for The Last Crusade. Indy finding his father, Sean Connery, who went missing whilst tracking down the Legend of the
Which
Holy
is
Grail.
almost so
We're back into
meta, isn't it?
Nazis.
That you brought Sean Connery in to
Yeah,
play the father of Indiana Jones. As I said, Spielberg wanted to direct a Bond movie.
yeah. We're back into Nazi territory with the Nazis seeking religious iconography. And this film is a solid final entry in the series. From the opening prologue showing young Indy seeking to stop the theft of an artifact, to a biplane dogfight, desert tanks battle, and much, much more. And it flows with a narrative that is genuinely clue piecing together from one scene to the next. The chemistry between Ford and Connery works so well that if anyone doesn't feel a tear in their eye when Connery's Henry Jones Sr. finally calls his son Indiana, you're dead to me. If you don't feel yourself welling up at that, you're dead to me, because that is the defining moment of their relationship. It closes with a genuine ride into the sunset, the perfect end to the series. So why on earth did they give us Crystal Skull? Why did they have to go and ruin it by giving
I don't
us
know, a question that will be asked for
a
many times,
mess?
and to
I
some
mean, I
extent,
admit I was excited when
with the idea of a new Indiana Jones film, I still think the three films should have been
yeah,
it, should have called it a day. As you said, it gave the obligatory ride into the sunset. I would rather have
I was
seen
excited.
something like the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles and taking the adventures of a young Indy
Yeah,
than playing on this idea for a fourth film. There had been talk for many years of another Indiana Jones film, and several scripts were circulating, including one that whether it was true or false that would have Kevin Costner as Indy's estranged kid brother, which would have been an interesting way to go. But the film that we got
Yeah.
felt like a combination of fan service, um, lots and lots of missteps. Didn't mind the setting being moved from the 30s to the 50s because I thought that was
No.
interesting to have him up against the Russians. And I didn't mind the idea that we were getting into science fiction elements because that's what the 1950s flying saucers was all about. But all
Yeah.
those elements didn't land for whatever reason. The film that we got just feels an afterthought as opposed to a complete Indiana Jones story. Even the fan service of the return of Marion, the idea of the son in Shia LaBeouf, who was clearly miscast in that particular movie. I think I'd rather have gone with the Kevin Costner younger brother.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, when this film was in production, Spielberg was insisting that it wouldn't be CGI heavy, and there was going to be a lot of practical effects. But then, as soon as the film starts with a CGI prairie dog popping out the ground, you immediately realise there's a bait and switch gone on, and the film ended up being clumsy and disjointed. The action sequences are let down either by poor editing, the chase through the jungle scene, for example, poor CGI, again, the chase through the jungle scene, or poor attempts at humour. Look, that jungle scene is just atrocious. Let's just stick
yeah,
with that.
I never want to see swinging monkeys ever again in an Indiana Jones film. It missed on
And
all
then we have
calibers.
the fridge. We have the fridge, which has replaced jumping the shark with nuking the fridge as a result, as the point in a franchise where you just lose all hope that it's got anything to
And
deliver.
do you know where that scene
I
comes
always
from?
said that someone needs to re-edit
Do you
that
know where that
scene.
scene comes from, Andy?
Where did it
It
come
comes
from?
from an original script to Back to the Future. That was how
Oof.
Marty McFly was going to get back to present day, and that was the original ending of Back to the Future.
The problem with the fridge is, I mean, someone tried saying, oh, well, the lead-lined fridge would have protected him from radiation. It's like, no, 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 no. It might have protected the radiation, but the intense heat would have melted the lead around the body. And the fact that it launched about 1.5 miles before bouncing on the ground, it would have broken every bone in that body. So it should have landed, the door flops open, and a charred, broken corpse of Indiana Jones rolls out. Roll end credits. That's how someone needs to re-edit that film, because then you've only got half an hour of a terrible, terrible film to watch, and you can just wipe it out of existence. It was a mess of a film, and I'm like you. I'm not sold on the next one. I'm not sold that we need it. I'll give it a chance. I hope that it recovers a bit, but I do like to think of this as a trilogy of films.
I totally agree. Just before we close this, I certainly believe that with the fifth film, and not having Spielberg at the helm, this is such a monumental way to make an apology for Kingdom of the Crystal Skull that they know that how polarized the fans were over that
Yeah.
movie. There has to be an aim not to nuke the fridge with this one.
I posted out a poll on our Twitter feed this week to find out what you all thought of the Indiana Jones franchise, asking the question, which Indiana Jones film is your favourite out of the three and that other one that currently exist? 39.2% of people said Raiders of the Lost Ark. 39.2% of people said The Last Crusade, so we've got a dead heat in first place there. Temple of Doom racked up 13.7% of votes. And Kingdom of the Crystal Skull had 7.8% of votes, which I did question. I'm intrigued who's liking this, but no one got back to me. No one wants to own up to voting for Crystal Skull.
If you want to see Raiders of the Lost Ark, they are available on Amazon, but I don't know for how much longer, on Amazon Prime. And of course, there is a fantastic new 4K restoration that's available, discs, which I would love, even though it does include the fourth one. But it's a film that every few years I will go back to. And I had the great pleasure of sharing it with my boy, and who was absolutely enamored by it. And the legacy lives on.
My kids were introduced to it at quite an early age, and they inherited my DVD box set when I got the Blu-ray set, which they basically worn the DVDs out. I didn't know you could wear DVDs out, but they have watched them so many times. All of my kids have embraced this film, which shows that it is timeless.